So, the Democratic primary is coming up, and Joe Biden is running, the sitting president of the United States, who I have no doubt will clear the primary and win with no debate or any significant opposition. But I pay attention to politics. I like to look at the in-depth aspects of the conversation, and one of the candidates that is running in this primary is RFK Jr., who's running on kind of a strange platform for Democratic standards, given that there hasn't really been an anti-vaccine lane opened to people on the left in the party since like the early 2000s. Back then, the Democrats, especially the much more progressive Democrats, would kind of play footsie with the anti-vax movement because that was back before it ended up being co-opted by the far right. Now, I, for one, tend to believe in science. I'm vaccinated myself. I'm not against vaccines. I'm not even against the COVID vaccine. But I think he's saying some compelling things on the issue. And I think it would be remiss of me and also the voters to not acknowledge that certain people in that crowd do make points that are objectively true. Like, for example, the fact that the effectiveness of the vaccine was greatly overstated by pharma companies, and then politicians and other people in the government who had stakes in these companies ended up parroting the talking points that came out of studies that were literally funded by the vaccine manufacturers. And when you have these large corporations essentially having a monopoly on these patents, on the process of making what should be life-saving cures for this disease, you run into a problem where state and corporate power end up actually merging to push an inferior product onto the population, to push false notions about medicine onto the population. Now again, I'm vaccinated myself. I think it does do some good as far as immunity is concerned. It's better to have it than to not have it. But I think it's undeniably true that there was an immense amount of misinformation surrounding the vaccine, in large part so the government could flood these companies with money, these private corporations who had a monopoly on the process of making the vaccine. And it's created a situation where, they've ranked in billions and billions of dollars, while we've also seen your average American, as well as many small business owners, have their wealth greatly shrink due to inflation and these other economic problems that have occurred as fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. And RFK Jr. is the only guy talking about this. I watched his announcement speech, and he mostly doesn't even talk about the vaccine stuff. I mean, he mentions it in the context of inflation and the economic fallout that came from the pandemic, but largely what his message is this merger of state and corporate power. And on that subject, he is absolutely correct. We're seeing the United States descend further and further and further down the road to oligarchy. I wouldn't call this country an oligarchy myself, but if things continue going at the same rate, where the poor continue rapidly accelerating towards immense poverty at the rate that we are, where profits continue being raked in at record levels, where housing continues to be more and more difficult to attain for your average American, I think what we're seeing and what we're going to see is ultimately going to be an oligarchy, especially when you have, and this is something that RFK is addressing as well, these corporate funded super PACs and, billionaires influencing elections and so on. Oh, he's actually going out there and addressing these fundamental economic problems that have stemmed from this all. Um, I also like the fact that he's going out there against lockdowns, which is, one area where I think he would be stronger than Biden in a debate against Trump. Trump can go out there and hit Biden on the way that he rolled out the vaccine, kinda, not really, because it was the Trump administration that actually funded the effort to create the vaccine. Um, but RFK has no connection to any of this. He has not been in office. He didn't touch the pandemic. He didn't oversee the response to the pandemic. And so he could hit Trump easily by saying, look, you locked us all in our houses, throughout the duration of this whole pandemic. Why? Why did you reap this immense hardship on the lives of so many Americans and so many business owners in this country, all the while sending billions and billions of dollars in subsidies to these corporations and billionaires? It's a pretty good line of attack, and most Americans now, in retrospect, seem to be against the lockdown stuff. We all hated the lockdown stuff. I mean, I didn't, because I just stay in my house all the time anyway. But there's this feeling amongst a lot of Americans, and I think now in retrospect among the average American, that the lockdowns were entirely superfluous. There was no point to doing them, because the people who were going to get sick were going to get sick, and if they wanted to halt the spread of disease, they could have just chose to stay in their house if they wanted to not do it that bad. But a tiny percentage of the population being killed off due to the natural spread of disease is just that, natural. I don't think all of our lives should be stopped in their tracks simply to prevent a couple people from dying of disease who were probably going to die from other causes anyway. The actual number of people who that ended up happening to is really quite small in comparison to the general population. And so I don't fucking care. And I think most Americans generally have that attitude. We just don't care. But on both sides, the Republicans and the Democrats, we were really being pushed to have these lockdowns and to participate in these lockdowns. And if he could hit Trump on that and hit him on his record with COVID, I think that's something that could speak to a lot of average Americans. I think the major problem with RFK is, besides some of his conspiracy theories just straight up not being true, it's his voice. He speaks. I don't know if he has a serious speech impediment or something. I think he had some kind of disease in the past that's why he talks like this. But he speaks in the most nauseating, irritating way of almost anybody I've ever heard. His voice is really, really hard to listen to, and the delivery of the message is almost as important, if not more important, than the actual message, the substance of the policy. And the fact that delivery is going to be stilted and stifled by his voice, that's not great. It's not a great situation. And so I don't think Americans would vote for that guy, just in general. Not in large enough numbers. They voted for John Fetterman, in Pennsylvania, and he could like barely get out a sentence. So, I mean, maybe, like, maybe, um, but it's not something that I would bet on, unfortunately. Um, which really sucks. I mean, the substance of the policy should be what matters, right? Um, but I mean, it is what it is. It's an optics thing. Um, and so that's kind of the major flaw with him as a candidate, though. Um, and I don't know if he'll win any states. He might win like New Hampshire or something just as a protest vote. But I mean, yeah, I'm gonna go out there for him. I'm gonna vote for him. Um, I also like a lot of the stuff that he said on Ukraine. I don't think we should be. Uh, it's not of vital U.S. interest for us to be barreling our way towards a potential conflict in Europe if there's like even one misfire that ends up on the Polish border. Then it's just fucking World War III. Like like a small event could occur, one of our drones gets shot down or something, and then like it's done, like the moment one American is killed, it's done. Like we're just going in there, instead of just having our special forces on the ground and in order to have Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Raytheon rake in massive profits, sending these huge amounts of arms over. I mean, really, that's what it is. Like, we withdrawed from Afghanistan, and the arms dealers and their lobbyists basically saw, like, a hole um, that needed to be filled. And so they really pushed for this Ukraine stuff. I think that's a component to why, we're even doing anything there in the first place. Um, and RFK Jr. has gone out there and said, like, look, like, why are we there? Like, this is just some country in Eastern Europe, um, you know, not important to the United States. It's endangering global peace, and it doesn't matter to us. Like, I don't give a fuck about the Ukrainians. I especially don't when we have issues such as homelessness, food insecurity, and various diseases of despair ravaging this country, poverty ravaging this country. I do not give a single solitary fuck about the people who would die in Ukraine or lose their freedom in Ukraine. If they want to run around with an AK-47 and fight their invaders, go on ahead. I don't like illegal offensive invasions, which is exactly what Russia did. But the idea that NATO, or especially the United States, should be like supplying and helping these guys, I don't agree with it. I just do not agree with it. I don't care. And you can call that like cold and heartless, and yeah, I mean, it is. But it's not my country at the end of the day. This is my country. And I want, our elected leaders to be focusing on us rather than those people over there. And he's talking about that. He's the only person running for the Democratic nomination who's talking about that. The only other guy who seems to be making some good points about this is Trump. And I don't even think he's being honest in his isolationism. I think he's just saying it because it's going to score him some political points with the more paleo-conservative elements of the base. But, that's neither here nor there. So I'm all in for RFK Jr. I don't care that he's a little wacky or that he's like kind of conspiracy brained or has a weird voice. I think he's making good points about the need to revitalize our welfare state, to address the economic fallout of COVID-19, and to right the wrongs of our response to the pandemic, to look into a lot of these bad decisions we made regarding that. And also, I think he's correct in his approach towards the Ukraine war. Yeah, I also just think it's going to be funny to vote for a Kennedy. Like, I don't live in Massachusetts, so I can't vote for like Joe Kennedy the third or whatever that schmuck's name is, that tried to primary Ed Markey. Um, the idea that like this political dynasty like still exists and is like giving us this goofy guy now, I think is pretty funny. And so yeah, it would be pretty funny to vote for him. I mean that's one of the other main reasons I'm gonna vote for him. Um, but I mean on the merits, out of all of the candidates, he's the one that I agree with the most.